Hello and welcome to another episode of the Daily Bolt with your host, Dr. Jeff Tilley. Today's topic is a little bit of an unusual one. An unsung casualty of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. Scientists. Sit back and relax and enjoy this little different Daily Bolt. So, this is not a topic that I necessarily had planned on doing. It is a topic that kind of came out and jumped out at me as I was looking over some science news from the past few days, past week, while I've been spending, a lot of time focusing on tropical weather. And there's an article, and I'm going to put the link up at the end of this particular episode, which isn't going to be super long, like the last one. But I am going to put a link up to an article in the journal Science. It is an online article that really goes into some of the details of what I'm bringing up here in what is a more political topic than I usually like to tackle on the Daily Bolt. But it does impact science. And as such, it actually makes it a worthy topic. And the issue at hand is the fact that the Taliban have taken over Afghanistan for the first time in a couple of decades, more or less. It depends how you want to count the amount of influence that the Taliban has had. Their direct and total rule occurred from 1996 to 2001. And was ended after the 9/11 attacks prompted the Bush administration, this was Bush 2, at the time, to send U.S. military forces to Afghanistan to try and root out terrorist elements, specifically Al-Qaeda, that had been associated with the tragedies that occurred on September 11, 2001. Even though the Taliban have not been ruling in Afghanistan in totality since 2001, they have had influence in various sectors of the country over the past 20 years, while you could say they have been waiting out the U.S.-led occupation and administration support, whatever you want to call the mission that is coming to this rather chaotic and rushed end now. Regardless, they've been waiting out, and they have had some influence in certain parts of the country. And one of the aspects of the life in Afghanistan over the last 20 years that they have had some influence over, although that influence had been decreasing in recent years, was of the scientific and academic establishment in Afghanistan. The Taliban are largely a religious fundamentalist faction. I don't know if faction may not be the right word. Government may be the correct word going forward. Regardless, they are not particularly interested in science in particular. They have other issues, and some of those have been documented quite nicely in the press, where we've all been reminded how the Taliban ruled with respect to human rights, etc. Again, from 1996 to 2001 has been the most recent period of their total rule. And one thing that has not gotten much attention is what happens to the scientists and the academics that are doing research and have been doing research in collaboration with other scientists around the world over the last 20 years. Even within a relatively peaceful Afghanistan, there have been incidents where individuals have been targeted, scientists in particular have been targeted to be killed by any number of ways. There's one scientist who's mentioned by a pseudonym in this article who was targeted twice, once in 2009, once in 2019. The first time there was a bomb planted in the building he was working in. Second time a suicide bomber came in front of his car. And this scientist in particular was lucky. The first attempt, 5 of his colleagues were killed by the bomb. The second attempt, policemen managed to get a hold of the suicide bomber before he was able to carry out his plan. And there are other examples that are hinted at in this particular article. And even though the Taliban have said certain things about having a new kind of enlightened perspective, recent events, as reported in this article, suggest otherwise. There are some women scientists who have commented to various individuals that the reporter, the writer of the article, talked to about the Taliban coming for members of her family and other scientists' families, rounding them up. They have also had reports of scientists who are out in more remote parts of the country and not in the capital city of Kabul, who feel it is far too dangerous for them to attempt to get to Kabul to try and evacuate. And there are colleagues of these scientists in the U.S. and elsewhere that are trying to make efforts to find ways to get these people out, but as has been reported in the media, it is very uncertain whether all these people can possibly get out by a week from today. Another potential issue that is discussed in the article is the fact that the Taliban do not have a lot of money to operate research universities, other research institutions that have popped up over the last 10 to 20 years, some of which have been at least partly funded with foreign funds, some of which have actually had funding from the previous government of Afghanistan. There is equipment that could be sold on the black market. There are people in particular who are concerned that their research will be destroyed. That has happened before, and again in the 1996 to 2001 time frame, research was destroyed, academics were rounded up, and some of them were put to death, some of them weren't. Regardless, there is a substantial apparent fear among the academic and scientific establishment in Afghanistan that they simply will not survive once the takeover becomes fully realized. And based on their past experience and even the incidents that have occurred under a relatively stable rule and allied occupation and assistance, they have good reason to be. There are organizations in the U.S. There is an organization called Scholars at Risk. It's a network. I'll type that into the next slide as we switch to it. And that has the link to the article, which also talks about this network. Another issue that is of concern to the academics that have spoken to reporters from various countries is the fact that even as the Taliban started taking over in the last couple of weeks various parts of the country, they have gone into universities and removed the existing administrators and have put in administrators of their own. The question is, what will that do to the scientific research that goes on? Most of the scientists are not optimistic, to put it mildly. They actually think that there may be just a lot of wholesale gutting of academic programs and research at the universities, and they may just become training grounds for college-age revolutionaries to join Al-Qaeda, ISIS. I guess it's ISIS-K they're calling it now. I don't know what that means. Somebody can explain it to me maybe in a comment. I haven't had the time today to look that up. But or any of the other potential terrorist organizations that may be looking at Afghanistan as, once again, a safe haven to come in and set up shop. There are a lot of efforts going on. There are individual university researchers that are lobbying the Biden administration. The Scholars at Risk group is corresponding with the State Department and the Secretary Blinken. I don't know how much headway, and the writer of the article does not know how much headway they're really making, as has been clear from various White House press conferences. It's not entirely clear what's going on and what efforts are being made, and what efforts still really need to be made that haven't even started, with only a week to go, and a deadline that appears to not be very flexible, if any flexibility at all, based on what we heard today on the news. There are a few scientists that have had partnerships with Europeans, and some of our European allies have been able to help get some of these scientists out. They are temporarily residing in positions at German, French universities, etc. They probably will be able to stay there. I can't imagine that the Germans and the French would boot them out at some point. So those people are at least in good hands. But there's unknown numbers of others who may not get out and may not be able to ever do science again, and may even lose their lives for it. This is not something you want to see, but it is a good example for what can happen. I think there is a lot of, this is now kind of some personal opinion as I'm switching over to the second slide that has the link. And I'm putting in the name of that Scholars at Risk organization, and in particular, the name of contact that they mention. He's the executive director of this organization. There's a couple of comments that I'll make. One is one that other pundits and media people have actually made regarding this entire affair, in that it's been 20 years and some changes occurred, but obviously something was not done right in the fact that it could collapse as quickly as it has and put everything in such a rushed, hurried, dire situation. I'm not going to assign blame to anybody other than the fact that we've been in Afghanistan for 20 years, and this is a very abrupt ending that may not need to have happened. It was not probably planned very well. It may not have been negotiated well by the previous administration. There's probably blame to go all around. There's a lot of blame potentially to go to how the Afghan military was trained, how nation building didn't really happen. It probably assumed it was someone assumed it was happening, and it never really happened, or else it would not have fallen apart like this. So there's lots of questions about just what the hell happened the past 20 years. Those are questions that are going to be asked for years and maybe decades to come. The second point is that there's a lot in how the Taliban operates that is consistent with how the Chinese operated during the Cultural Revolution in the 1970s and early 1980s. I have Chinese colleagues that knew people who experienced that and barely survived it. Any totalitarian type of regime can assume power and target academics, scientists, doctors, professionals of all sorts, and basically eradicate them from the social landscape. The Chinese proved it could be done, and done fairly quickly. The Taliban may be able to show that as well, and certainly in their past rule, they definitely demonstrated that. scientists should not take what they have for granted. And there's a sense that I have in the U.S. that the scientific establishment seems to take itself a little bit for granted and may not appreciate what it really has. That perhaps should stop. That might change some perspectives on a number of issues all across the board. That's about all the commentary I'm going to make. I'll leave it there. I'm Dr. Jeff Tilley. This is the Daily Bolt. Have a good night, good morning, good afternoon, and if you can help, Scholars at Risk Organization information is here. I'll leave it up for about another 10-15 seconds or so. Have a good night.